Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, August 28th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the judge's decision to make a March 4th start date for Donald Trump's election interference trial, the national court case that has been brought before him, in which we saw the special counsel actually ask for this trial date to occur on January 2nd, 2024. Now, this was about election subversion, about getting around the presidential election results. Essentially, in the simplest of terms, they are accusing Donald Trump of trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And with this court case decision to now have a March 4th trial date, it is 2 months further out from what was originally requested, but still a very bad position to be. CNN reported, and many other major networks have included in their headlines, that this day is the day before Super Tuesday, the day before a third of the United States Republican Party delegates will be allocated in elections across the United States. You can see with the 2020 map here, this isn't updated to reflect 2024 because the numbers will be slightly different, but relatively speaking, 1/3 of all of the ballots counted in the GOP primary likely will come down in this race. 1/3 of all the delegates proportioned, and it would put the the Republican Party in an interesting position because it means that the day before, Donald Trump will likely not be able to campaign across these Super Tuesday states, but more so that you have 1/3 of the delegates being considered and voted on just one day after the trial. And this also is to say that the date of March 4th, 2024 is so early on in the campaign season that depending on the outcome, it actually could change the trajectory of the GOP primary. I say that because not many primaries actually occur before March 4th, 2024. January 15th is the start date for the Iowa caucuses, but then you're waiting over 2 weeks until we head into the heading into New Hampshire. Now, we don't have a perfect date yet for the GOP primary in New Hampshire, but it will be New Hampshire second in line. Then it will be Nevada on February 8th. Then it will be South Carolina on February 24th. But again, we're getting very close to this March 4th timeline. Then you have the primary held in Idaho on March 2nd, the DC primary held on March 3rd, the North Dakota Republican caucuses on the 4th, and then on the 5th again, all of these states. I mean, you're talking about a super significant amount. But this is only the beginning, because as I said, though there are 1/3 of all of the delegates counted here, the remaining 2/3, or roughly that, subtracting the ones I've already mentioned, will occur likely after a decision is made. We can see here that March 12th, the primaries will be held in a number of states, but it continues on as we get further and further down the timeline. For instance, March 19th, Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Kansas, and Ohio, some of the most populous states in the entire country besides Kansas. Then the next month, again, nearly 30 days later, April 2nd, you have a number of states, Delaware, Rhode Island, Wisconsin. April 6th, you have a number of other states as well. And you continue on and on and on until you finally finish with all of the states finishing around the end of May. So the timeline between the GOP primary starting and finishing is about 5 months, 4 to 5 months here of consistent campaigning in a usual election. It'll probably be cleared far earlier than that. But the Super Tuesday primary will be a very important one, and it also allows, again, depending on the outcome of Super Tuesday and the outcome of this trial, a number of candidates an incentive to stay in the race. Because even if they are decimated on March 5th, 2024, should Donald Trump be deemed ineligible to run for president, or maybe, this court has damaged him enough so, on top of the ones that we are expecting to see in New York, in Georgia, etc., depending on the impact of this court case, depending on the verdict, Donald Trump could be derailed from winning the GOP primary. Now, I don't think that's a likely outcome whatsoever. I think in any case, unless he's actually going to jail, you will see that Donald Trump will actually receive potentially a boost depending on the outcome of the trial. But there are some circumstances I can imagine that would allow candidates like Ron DeSantis just enough energy and enthusiasm on their end to stay in the race in the event that something bad happens to Donald Trump from a legal perspective. In the event the RNC even tries to ditch him in some of these important states out of a fear that he would weigh down the general election. I mean, there are real valid concerns here about what these court cases will do to the electability of President Donald Trump. And I think that's why many of these candidates are so willing to stay in the race, even even though he has such a dominating lead. I mean, we can see here that he is up 40%. In no normal election would any candidates stay in a race where they are down 40% so consistently and not much change is expected to happen. Even after the GOP primary, we did talk about shifts in support, which were major in the context of some candidates received a bump. Some candidates started to be reconsidered, reevaluated, put back on the map, and major consideration changes for vice president, who was auditioning, who was railing against Trump, who did worse in the debate. But the idea that had a super substantial, removal from Donald Trump has not happened yet. It might happen with consistent, debate, non-appearances. Maybe you would see that there was and is a negative impact on Donald Trump by just him not showing up to some events as well. Not only the debate, but also maybe not spending as much time at the Iowa State Fair, or not focusing enough time on New Hampshire, or spending too much time in different forms of the media that aren't reached by the average Republican voter. That is a strong possibility. And looking at where we are nationally, again, these candidates are in not because they think in this primary that they actually will defeat Donald Trump, but rather they are hoping that he ends up out of the race on his own volition, or by force, by legal force in some circumstances. And what we've already seen being discussed is this 14th Amendment, Section 3 here, a legal battle that is being taken up against Donald Trump. Now, this doesn't have to do with the court case. This likely will be impacted by it, depending on the verdict here. But the argument from constitutional scholars is that Donald Trump is not eligible for office because of what is written in the Constitution. It says that somebody is not eligible to assume public office if they have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or have given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. It's very, very explicit here that the word insurrection is intentional, and it's one that I think Democrats have used intentionally, knowing not only that this was part of the Constitution, but that generally speaking, it's a flag for constitutional scholars, that insurrection is something that is disqualifying for a candidate to be president. And seeing here that you have, that court case that was held before the United States Senate, is Donald Trump guilty of the insurrection? Again, that's why there was all that consideration. If they had convicted him, that would have been the trial. That would have been the court of law. That would have been the impeachment that would have declared, yes, he was, and therefore he was ineligible to run in 2024, no matter how hard he tried. But this argument is being raised also in the state of New Hampshire. The Republican Secretary of State is looking potentially to remove Donald Trump from the ballot in 2024. Now, it probably won't get anywhere, and it's probably just right now a pushback against him as a candidate. But generally speaking, I mean, the 14th Amendment is a legal battle and an argument being used. And depending again on how this ends up, it's one that could be pitched not only to constitutional scholars, but also potentially to the American people. Not to actually disqualify him from the ballot, but rather to say that we know that he tried to overturn the election, that we know that he, this is from the Democratic perspective, he incited this insurrection. And even constitutionally, this man should not be allowed to run for president. Now, I don't know how well the ad or the argument would land amongst the American public, but I certainly think it is one that the Democratic Party is looking to make. But this March 4th start date, I think, is just going to have a very negative impact on the president for the general election. I honestly think there is a strong chance it helps him in the primary. But for the general election, I think that because this is happening much earlier than the Trump legal team had expected. I mean, when they announced the special counsel wanted it to begin on January 2nd, 2024, they immediately went and argued that it should occur in 2026. They wanted it to happen very, very late, 2 years after when the election was actually set to occur or set to begin. And the reason for that was because they were arguing that they did not have enough to build a case against what is being brought forth towards them. The Trump team and the legal team is arguing that everybody's against Donald Trump. Biden, the Department of Justice, the judge, whoever it might be, everyone is out to get him, and they need time to combat it. But ultimately, the judge said, nope, we are going to treat him as everybody else. I mean, we can actually read the quotes here to see what is being said. They are arguing that setting a trial date does not depend and should not depend on a defendant's personal obligations. They said that if this was an athlete, it would be inappropriate to take into account a professional athlete's schedule to work in the trial. The argument here that if you are coming forth before a judge, you have to adjust to their schedule, not make them adjust for you, and said that it would be inappropriate in a case involving a former president running to return to the White House, to adjust the trial date to his personal schedule. That is the argument here. She also said that she takes seriously the defense's request that Mr. Trump be treated like any other defendant appearing before this court, and I intend to do so, essentially using the case that the Trump campaign is using, that he's not being treated fairly, and turning it around and saying, actually, he 100% is, which is exactly why I'm not moving his trial date. I mean, it is very interesting to see just how this dynamic has ended up or how it will end up, because looking at the trial date, I can imagine this would be one of the most dominating parts of the 2024 election for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Forget the primary. I think Donald Trump still wins it. But again, depending on the outcome of this trial, Donald Trump could be in very serious legal trouble. Not to mention the court cases again, as the article discusses, the ones coming out of New York when it comes down to the hush money scandal, the ones out of Florida when it comes down to classified document scandal, the one in Fulton County, Georgia when it comes down to pressuring Brad Raffensperger and other Georgia officials to overturn the free and fair election that occurred there in 2020. I mean, there are things that are starting to pile on, and it's beginning to form that perfect storm that we know about, that the Democratic Party had in 2020, that they're hoping comes again in 2024. They also had in 2022. And chances are, given the legal trouble that Donald Trump is yet set to face, it probably will. I mean, right now, there is a closer race than I think Democrats are hoping for, obviously. Donald Trump in the most recent Emerson College poll actually leads Joe Biden by about 2 points nationwide. This will likely change. Once you start to see that Donald Trump and Joe Biden will likely be also their respective nominees, I think a significant portion of this undecided vote is here because they do not believe that either of them will be the nominee. I think there's a significant chunk of the country that thinks Joe Biden will be replaced, a significant chunk of the country that thinks Trump will be ineligible to be the nominee, and generally speaking, most people don't believe that rematches are possible in presidential elections. That's why people were immediately quick to dismiss the notion that Hillary Clinton was going to run again in 2020, that Al Gore was going to run in 2004. I mean, yes, there are people who do try to run for a rematch. In this case, obviously, President Donald Trump. But it rarely ever happens. It rarely ever succeeds, only once in United States history. And generally speaking, I mean, these candidates are relatively unsuccessful, and I think that everybody, including the politicians, know that. So when Donald Trump and Joe Biden are being faced off against polls now, I think they are not as important as they will be in a year from now. I think those will be the true determining polls, the true gauge of public sentiment. And I also think that what the Democratic Party isn't doing as well as they did in 2020 is making Donald Trump out to be the boogeyman. They did it well because the economy was in total collapse. COVID lockdowns were rampant. He was tweeting nonstop. He was saying all the right things for a Democratic victory. But this time around, even though he's doing a lot of that and honestly more based off his history, he's not being painted out that way just yet. The Biden campaign is very dormant. They only have 10 campaign staffers. For context, Ron DeSantis has over 100. Donald Trump also has over 100. So you see full-fledged campaigns on the GOP side. The Democrats are laying low. They're not hammering in their attacks as much as they need to be, or not need to be, but as much as they are going to be in a year from now. They're not hitting at the points that matter most yet. I mean, they are waiting to strike because they know that the GOP is at their point where they're going to tear each other apart. That's been the strategy. That's been the reason why you have this, Biden lay low strategy, because it makes sense. There is no one you are going to win over now versus a year from now if you hammer in the same points. They just become less important. They just become less sensitive, and they don't have as much of an impact. So I think the Biden campaign is waiting to strike. Trump campaign has been in full force, right? We keep that in mind as well. Also, we will see the direct impact of these court cases come November 2024, come October 2024, August, September, right? June, July. Once these decisions, these verdicts are given, handed down to the Trump campaign, depending on how harsh they are, there are very good ways for Democrats to paint Donald Trump as a criminal, as they already have been. It will land once the court cases do. And while I don't think, and this is not to say that I think there will be some landslide for Joe Biden, I certainly think his numbers will be a lot better once the American public realizes, yes, we are actually in for a rematch. On top of that, there are valid concerns that, this is, again, the Democratic Party is arguing this. There are valid concerns that we have about his legitimacy to run, about what he has done with the insurrection, with hush money, with classified documents, X, Y, and Z. And I do think it will still be Biden versus the boogeyman, that Biden is running to prevent Trump from a second term, as he did in 2020, and it's a strategy that worked then and will likely work this time around. It's clear that Joe Biden is, in fact, an unpopular president. There's no denying that, down 11 points nationwide. But there's also a reason that this didn't have as much of an impact on the midterm elections versus defeating candidates like Donald Trump, because people are afraid of the type of candidate that he has made, and they are obviously afraid of this person who has already built out this brand, built out this legacy, and although the GOP very, very much loves him, the American public very clearly is not so happy with what he has done as of recent. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.